All right, this is Dr. Allen here with a really good friend of mine from many, many years ago. We actually went to school together a couple of decades ago at Loma Linda. I got to know Mark and his family and have followed him over the years. And I'm really happy to introduce you to him. He's going to talk about a subject that's very personal to him. And he's going to be very vulnerable with us and tell us his struggles. And how it's really altered the course of his career as a physician. And his name is Dr. Mark Wagner. Welcome to our Facebook Lab IQ platform. This really is a platform where we have thousands of people that are interested in the lab testing and why it's important to get labs done. And it's sort of my passion not to waste a bunch of money on labs. In other words, labs should really give us some really powerful information that we can act on. And so I brought you on specifically to talk about your personal experience with cognitive decline and how you feel like maybe testing helped you solve some of the problems and pointed you in the right direction. So I'd first like for you to just introduce yourself, talk about your early career and what you're doing now and so on.
So my early career, for 10 years, I was a pain management specialist. I was a physical medicine rehabilitation specialist, and then sub-specialized in pain management. I did, all those, fancy procedures, sticking needles in people's backs and delivering medicine to ease pain. And then in late 2014, I just felt like I was losing some bandwidth, and I was getting kind of tired, and I was breaking out in odd rashes, and I thought it was stress. So I thought, well, you know what? I've been doing this for 10 years. I've built up some equity. I'm going to sell my practice, and I'm going to write for a living because I enjoy writing. And I'm going to fire up a blog about lifestyle issues and health and food and movement and sleep and stress and connectedness and all that good stuff. And then I'll be healthy because I won't have the stress of a high-powered clinical practice. So I sold my practice, and I continued to decline, and it was baffling to me. And to make a very long, complex, and semi-dramatic story short, what we found later was that we had a leak in our shower that had caused toxic mold overgrowth. And I happen to be one of the 24% of the population that does not clear mycotoxins or mold toxins well. And those are also neurotoxins. So I was getting sort of poisoned systemically, but critically in my brain function by a buildup of toxins. And so I moved out of the house. I was getting asthma. I became a steroid dependent asthmatic almost overnight. It was crazy. So I moved out of our house to sort of test the hypothesis that this is what was bothering me, because it was weird. And I was, allopathically trained, and we didn't really have much training in this. And I thought it was weird to even suspect it. But I moved out across town into a condo just to test the hypothesis. And within 3 days, my asthma cleared up. And I wasn't fighting for air anymore. And then I was sort of left with dealing with all the other wreckage that I could now pay attention to because I wasn't fighting for air anymore. And that was a lot of cognitive, a lot of brain fog and profound fatigue. I couldn't string two sentences together. I was so fatigued. I wasn't able to climb a flight of stairs. Just walking up a gentle 3% grade at the park, I felt like somebody had turned gravity up on the planet to 11. And it was totally crazy. And through a lot of good help and connections in the functional medicine community, I was able to get these things addressed. I was able to actually measure the mold biotoxins that I was shedding in my urine, and they were horrific. We were able to get the house remediated. I was able to start taking oral binders to remove some of these toxins, and my energy started coming back. And my bandwidth started coming back. I was able to read again. There was a point in time where I couldn't even read, or it was really nuts. But during that time, it was a very dark time. I mean, this lasted. We're talking. I had 3 to 4 months of complete disability during this time, and this would have been the summer of 2016. and I really just couldn't do anything. And during that time, I got very, very depressed, as you can imagine. And some of that depression was circumstantial, but some of it was also sort of endogenous and coming from the toxin environment that I was in, and brain just not working well. It's depressed because of that. And I actually wanted to commit suicide. I thought my life was over. And coming out of that, of course, when I felt better, I no longer had those destructive thoughts. But I still had a lot of fatigue, and I did feel like I just wasn't all the way back yet. Maybe I was like 80% back. And so I started looking around for all the ways that I already knew to sort of kind of help me get back in the game again. And so, I looked at everything I knew about food, everything I knew about sleep, everything I knew about stress and connectedness and movement and exercise and adaptogens and supplements. And I was working really hard on myself, and I worked on designing supplements for myself, and those were helpful, especially adaptogenic herbs. And we can talk about that later. I got a lot of testing done so that my supplements were targeted to me and what I needed. So I had problems with methylation. My homocysteine was off the charts. I had all kinds of issues that could be addressed relatively simply with methylated B vitamins. But you got to know this stuff first. You got to get the testing done. And I had gotten the testing done for the toxins, and we were cleaning those up. But it turns out I had lots of other issues. And one of those issues was the fact that I was ApoE4 positive, doubly so. I was homozygous. I had both copies, all the copies you can have, of one of the most, one of the highest known risk factors for developing early onset Alzheimer's disease. And of course, that was sort of terrifying. And it was fortuitous that in the same year that I understood that about myself, Dr. Dale Bredesen was doing some really breakthrough work and published his book, The End of Alzheimer's, breakthrough work on showing that these genetic risk factors don't have to be a death sentence. Like if you, depending on what study you read, being ApoE4 positive, a double, being homozygous for ApoE4 puts you at anywhere from 50% to 90% risk of developing, lifetime risk of developing Alzheimer's. Well, that used to be terrifying until Dr. Bredesen put out his protocol of not only preventing, but in many cases, reversing cognitive decline through leveraging detailed, personalized health reports that you get back from detailed laboratory data, optimizing your values, looking at food, movement, sleep, stress, connectedness in your life, connectedness to your people and to your purpose and your meaning, all of that, create this environment where these quote unquote death sentence genes are no longer in the driver's seat. And it's very interesting about ApoE4. It's the oldest ApoE genotype there is. I mean, it's been around. It was here. It was our original Homo sapiens genotype until spontaneous mutations gave us ApoE2 and ApoE3. So to see it as like an abnormality is really not the way to look at it. It's probably the reason it has now become such a risk factor is it's not so much a reflection on our ancient genome as it is a reflection on our current modern environment of toxic food, toxic planet, and all the things that play into triggering inflammation in the body, because it turns out that ApoE4 sets you up to tilt towards an aggressive inflammatory response, which serves you well in the first half of your life as you are trying to fight off novel infections and heal up cuts and scrapes and bruises, which requires an inflammatory response in the beginning, but also requires a mop-up response in the other side of that. But that's sort of an early advantage in life, but it can sort of burn your house down in the second half of your life. It can burn down your vascular tree. It can burn down your brain if this inflammation is left unchecked, if the sources, the triggers of inflammation are left undealt with. And so we're in this amazing position now where knowing your genotype is no longer just a death sentence, because we understand that there are all these leverage points, more than 36 of them, according to Dale Bredesen, Dr. Dale Bredesen, more than 36 leverage points that you can intervene in to change your genetic fate, to actually change history. And that, to me, is astonishing. It's given me all kinds of hope. I've come back from the brink. Obviously, my brain is working. I'm able to be here and talk to you and string more than 2 sentences together. I'm able to write again. I'm able to do all kinds. I'm able to do knowledge worker stuff like I used to. And, that's phenomenal. I did a lot of repair. I had a lot of downtime, but, we took care of things. And I think that one of the messages I really want people to get is, is that it's a message of hope. It's a message of agency. It's a message of like, you can contend with reality because we know some things now. You're not a victim. And so with BioFlourish, I started out just being a kind of a food blogger. I was kind of a foodie and I liked writing. And really what it was evolved into is kind of my own mission statement is to end cognitive decline, starting with mine. And one of the supplements we developed out of that was basically taking what I was already taking to help me with brain fog and fatigue, particularly when I was so toxic, because I needed something. The game we're all playing at any moment is a game of neurochemistry, right? That's the game we're all playing. And so when you're feeling tired, when you're feeling foggy, when you're feeling unmotivated, when you're feeling depressed, you got to tell yourself, okay, I am playing the game of neurochemistry. What leverage points do I have over my neurochemistry to get me to the point where I can feel like, okay, I can get out of bed, make my bed, wash my face, and contend with reality today. And it turns out there are a lot of things you can do to influence your neurochemistry. And so one of the things I did, aside from attending to my food and movement patterns, exercise, meditating my stress into abeyance, and spending good time with good people and getting skin on skin time with important people in my life and getting that oxytocin flowing and connectedness and reconnecting with meaning and purpose. I did all that, but I also supported myself with adaptogenic herbs, rhodiola in particular, and then what I had learned about what was wrong with my methylation cycle. I was supporting myself with methylated B vitamins and also other precursors for acetylcholine. And I basically tried to support my neurochemistry in every way I could think of so that I could contend with reality and not be a victim anymore.
Yeah. And I wanted to say that, what scares me about your story is that as an allopathic trained physician, just like you, I get so afraid that people get written off as crazy, and
exactly.
They have these symptoms, and they come in and they see traditional doctors, and the doctors will just be looking at them going, I can't really explain this. And of course, they're not doing necessarily the testing that say functional medicine doctors would do. They're not looking at ApoE4 genotypes. They're not looking at the all the leverage points in the brain health protocols and those kind of things. They're not really thinking about those things. And unfortunately, I know homocysteine, for example, because we fought the insurance companies over this, they don't even cover, testing for homocysteine, for example. And so
that's crazy.
Yeah, so you go and you try to get them to pay for it. They won't. They say it doesn't matter. So this is what really scares me is here. And by the way, I think you do have a PhD or a master's in nutrition. I think that you did that before you went to medical school. Am I right? Or
I did. Yeah, I got a master's in public health nutrition because I was interested.
Yeah, so you kind of entered the whole process with a little bit different mindset. Of course, you went to Loma Linda, where I think they produce a more well-rounded person in terms of a medical, whether we look at medicine, but also you had that fairly strong nutrition background and exercise physiology and all that kind of stuff. And then here you experience this drastic change, and that scares me the absolute most because I know that so many people get written off as crazy.
Yes.
And I know that in particular, women probably get written off more so than men do. But I know it happens across the board. And I know that there's people out there struggling with this. And this is why I'm a huge advocate for taking a stand for yourself and going out and actually getting the testing done yourself and see where you're at in terms of your leverage points. So I want to talk about ApoE genotype testing for a little bit. You only need to have it tested once, right? And there's
That's correct.
So tell me about the ApoE4. If you inherit one from your mom and one from your dad, and so you have both ApoE4s, what percentage of the population actually has both percentages? Do you know?
Off the top of my head, I don't know what the percentage is, but I know the numbers. And so the numbers go shake down like this. So a single copy, that affects about 75 million Americans. A double copy affects about 7 million Americans. And so I'm not actually sure how many Americans there are, but I know it's in the hundreds of millions. So I'm not sure what the exact percentages are, but we're looking at, so you're looking at, for being heterozygous, so a single copy of ApoE4, you're looking at 75 million people affected. And for double copy, so being homozygous, you're looking at 7 million.
Yeah, and then of course your kids are at risk then, because you're going to at
Exactly.
least carry 2 copies that you know they're going to get at least one.
Exactly.
So the ApoE4, I'm just kind of thinking about this. Just so if I took an ApoE4 test and I'm positive, in other words, I have 2 ApoE4 genes, and so I have that ApoE4 genotype. Then what's the next step? Would it be doing something like the Bredesen protocol, where you actually look at all your leverage points and you see kind of all the areas that you could potentially intervene and fix?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to sound too dramatic, but this is the truth. I mean, if you carry ApoE4 in the modern toxic environment, and especially if you're homozygous, you are at high risk for a condition that is uniformly fatal, a condition that will steal your soul and then snatch your body. So I think you should take it seriously. And the way to take it seriously is to have some information about yourself. So when you have the knowledge that you have these risk factors, the correct response is not to freak out, but to ask yourself, okay, this is part of an ancient genome. This isn't a mistake, but there's a lot of environmental issues and probably some internal environment issues I need to clean up if I want to be around for my children and grandchildren and take care of myself. So, but knowledge is power. You got to know where the leverage points are. You can't just start saying, I mean, you can do the obvious things like start eating better. I mean, I think a lot of times if all we did was just do what we already know, we'd already be halfway down the road. But then there's a lot of things we don't know. And that's where, modern lab testing can be super helpful. For example, like when I looked at my methylation as reflected in homocysteine levels, I was sort of appalled, because I know that a high homocysteine is associated with high cardiovascular risk, as well as a separate identifiable risk factor for cognitive decline. And so I wanted to get that down. So it was nice to know it was elevated. I was able to incorporate the correct B vitamins, from whether, so it was B9, so folate, and then B12 and some B6, and preferably in their activated forms, because it turns out I also have an MTHFR variant. I don't want to call it a defect, but it's a variant, so that I don't process synthetic folic acid that's found in most vitamins and fortified foods very well. So I need to get it from natural sources or make sure that the supplement is methylated. And so these are things that are good to know, and you get that information from laboratory values.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to show you kind of what we did, at least on our website, to try to build something for people to look at brain health. I just want to share it with you and just kind of sort of review it. So let me see if I can just share my screen with you real quick. So tell me if you can see this. Can you see my screen?
I can see your screen. Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we built this brain health protocol based upon actually a health coach who, several health coaches called in and said, look, hey, we're concerned about brain health. We'd like to see the Bredesen protocol, and we want to see all the labs with that. So we started off by first, in the brain health thing, we start off with the ApoE4 gene testing. because that, sort of sets the tone with, your risk as far as that goes. And then we sort of went down the methylation pathway to look at homocysteine. And then, of course, we wanted to get baseline important nutrients. And so you can see B12 and vitamin D. Vitamin D is, it's been shown that, if we can keep it high enough, it can actually make a big time difference in a lot of neurological issues. Less seizures if you have a seizure disorder, less psychiatric breakthroughs if you have a psychiatric disorder. So when it comes to cognition, we like to make sure people are optimized on vitamin D. And I'm sure you'd agree with that.
Absolutely. Well, it turns out that vitamin D actually is more like a hormone, less like a vitamin when it comes to the brain. It's actually considered one of the trophic factors, and which was a term that was, in biochemistry that was originally reserved for talking about things like hormones, things trophic, things that support, nurture, and stimulate growth or change in an end organ target. And vitamin D, when it comes to the brain, is a trophic factor and influences synaptic repair and growth and all kinds of things. So it's super important. And if you're thinking that your vitamin D levels just being normal within the mean may not be optimal, right? Because normal includes Homer Simpson, and we're not interested in that. What we want is to be optimal. And so, Dr. Bredesen is recommending that your vitamin D levels be up around anywhere between 50 to 80 nanograms per milliliter. So, sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, in all my studies on vitamin D, I found that, most of the studies show the maximum effect above 60. So, there's different levels for different studies, but most of them, if you draw a line right at 60, you're going to get almost all the benefits that you see with vitamin D, which are enormous. The other one thing I want to say about vitamin D is that it's has a very wide therapeutic range, or very wide reference range, from 30 to 100. And so people typically don't get toxic on it until they get to levels of 150 or so. You begin to absorb too much calcium and stuff. So it's a very safe nutraceutical overall. And then in this protocol also, we look at high sensitivity CRP, which is a measure of inflammation in your body. Of course, the higher your inflammatory markers are, your higher your risk for lots of problems, including cancers and autoimmune diseases and so on. And the brain doesn't like inflammation either. As you referenced, particularly for ApoE4 people, they're very sensitive to inflammation. So keeping your inflammation down is key. The comprehensive metabolic panel, of course, looks at the glucose. Higher glucose levels are very bad for the brain, as is high fasting insulin levels. And of course, your hemoglobin A1C is a 3-month measurement of blood sugars. And then Dr. Bredesen wanted some very specific things like selenium and zinc and RBC copper, mercury and lead, and so on. And then thyroid testing, including reverse T3. And then some hormones too that he recommended, including cortisol and sex hormones and so on. And then actually, looking at advanced lipid panel, he felt helpful too. So we tried to put together this thing for people that are really concerned about their brain health. Of course, you could order these tests individually too, if you wanted to, on our site. But I think the take-home point here is that you don't have to go without and not know. And there is hope. And that was the main thing that I really wanted to talk about with you, is because there's super big time hope for people, whereas before, we're just kind of stuck maybe being labeled as crazy. And that's probably the thing that I worry about the most, is somebody saying, oh, he's just crazy.
Right.
And particularly a younger person who comes with cognitive issues.
Right. I mean, here's the deal. I was so, part of my being so terrified was not just because I thought my whole career in life was over and I would never be good for anything again. I was also terrified to seek help, because I knew what it was like to see that patient coming through the door who just looks neurotic with their mongoose bloodshot eyes and their story about craziness. And I know how easy it is to be a Holocaust denier when the Holocaust has not happened to you. I've been that I didn't want to go see. So it was hard for me to seek help and to actually be honest with how bad things were when I actually went. My wife had to come with me, and because I was just saying, oh yeah, I know I struggle a little bit with some asthma and fatigue.
Yeah. So here, I'm a huge advocate of disease interception using advanced biomarkers. So here's the way I think about this. So I think about a person who's proactive with their health. I think about a person who gets ApoE4 gene testing and realizes they're at high risk, and they go through the Bredesen protocol labs, and they look at all their leverage points, and then they go to a provider not having any symptoms at all, saying, hey, look, I'm ApoE4 positive here, and I'm very concerned about my health. I'm working on my homocysteine, getting that down. I want to get rid of my inflammation. I want to keep my sugars under really good control. I've screened my metals and my nutrients, and I've optimized those, and I want to work with you to protect my. And to me, that person doesn't ever get written off as crazy. They get written off as person, gosh, they are really knowledgeable and proactive about their health. It's a complete different presentation to that allopathic doctor when you have somebody who's well-read and they've taken all the advanced tests, and they may know more about the advanced tests than the allopathic physician does. And then all of a sudden the allopathic physician's kind of on the defensive going, okay, of course, yeah, we're going to control these things. And hopefully they'll read about the Bredesen protocol and about, and learn more. But the idea here is to create a more proactive person who takes information and they leverage testing, and that leverages risk over time. Because I'm telling you, if more people were thinking about this and being proactive about it, they wouldn't be getting written off as crazy as much. And my concern always is, there's so many probably untreated people that are carrying some sort of psychiatric diagnosis. And once you get labeled something in medicine, it's really hard to shake it. So that's why, I greatly respect you for, everything that you've done. Now, getting back to ApoE4 though. So ApoE4 also can tell us maybe what sort of nutritional intervention we respond better to in terms of low-fat diets or high-fat diets or so on. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah. So in general, one of the hallmarks, one of the problems with a lot of cognitive decline is that the brain is no longer utilizing glucose that well, and even if you're not insulin resistant. There's some problems there with the way glucose is being handled. And so there's been a lot of focus on ketogenic diets, which generate ketones either through fasting or through a high fat diet, so that you are sort of pushing the liver to use fat as fuel by breaking it down and turning it into these almost what I consider to be like water soluble fat, which is a ketone body, and can be a preferred fuel for the brain. And the problem with ApoE4 is that a lot of the ketogenic diets out there are pretty high in saturated fat, because we've given saturated fat more of a pass lately, because it doesn't seem to be quite as linked to heart disease as we thought it was in most cases. However, if you have ApoE4, you are more saturated fat sensitive. So while you might be doing your brain a favor by including, lots of coconut oil in your diet, you may be undermining your cardiovascular health over time and shooting your LDL through the roof and your particle number through the roof. So if you have ApoE4 and you want to do ketogenic type things for your brain, it's better to do intermittent fasting for starters, and give yourself a metabolic break between between dinner the night before and breakfast the next day, about a 16-hour break. That promotes all kinds of good things, not just ketosis. It also promotes what's called autophagy, which is cleanup crew inside the cells. Lots of good things there. So in order for you to make it that long between meals, you're going to actually dip into mild ketosis. And you'll find that once you conquer that and get through the tough part of upregulating your enzymes to produce ketones, that you will be quite cognitively clear in the morning, especially in the morning when you're running on ketones. And then you don't have to be doing some other things to generate those ketones that may not be as good for you. Then the other fats in your diet should be mostly poly and monounsaturated fats. There might be a role, especially early in the game, for using Mct oil, which is a medium chain saturated fat that mostly just gets converted into energy rather than going elsewhere. It doesn't really go into the lymphatic system. It doesn't really get carried in the same system that jacks up your LDL. However, I'm not clear about whether it's a good idea to be consuming large amounts of MCT oil if you are ApoE4 positive. I'm still evaluating that. Bottom line is, if you are ApoE4 positive, you are more prone to inflammation, you are more saturated fat sensitive, you need ketones, they're great, but there are better ways to generate them than consuming piles of fat. Intermittent fasting is really probably the way to go.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. You know, we were talking with Dr. Alan Christensen, who was sort of schooling us on labs to look for when you're on a ketogenic diet. And it is interesting to hear about ApoE4. So to me, what you're saying is, if you're ApoE4 positive, and I'm talking about homozygous, where you get both alleles, that you've got to be a little bit more careful on a ketogenic diet. And
You do.
Hey, everybody out there, let me just make this perfectly clear. I'm totally fine with the ketogenic diet. I'm not trying to bring people on to criticize ketogenic diet. I actually have patients on ketogenic diets. I'm a diabetes specialist, reversal specialist. If you're on a ketogenic diet, you can reverse diabetes and get the blood sugars down to hardly anything. So it's great. It's just a more difficult thing for some people. And again, one diet doesn't fit all. So what we're trying to use is advanced biomarker testing to help us understand which maybe nutritional interventions can help for people. So what I'm hearing Mark clearly say to me is, we've got to be really careful about being on a ketogenic diet if you have a very high risk for progression to early cognitive decline, because your brain likes mild ketosis, but maybe not ketosis all the time with the high fats. And so intermittent fasting may be a better approach, in your opinion. That's what I'm hearing you say. Is that?
Yeah. So and particularly, I mean, I think if you could sustain nutritional ketosis 24/7 with polys and monos, unsaturated fats, I suppose that would be okay. The thing I worry about with that is that people often forget to eat their veggies when they're doing that, and then they're missing out on some really important phytonutrients that, like anthocyanins and a whole bunch of others that are really supportive of brain health and decreased inflammation. So I actually really prefer the approach of fairly rigorous intermittent fasting. I fast for 16 hours every day between dinner and breakfast, and it works for me. I do use small amounts of MCT oil to help me bridge that gap, and I'm still evaluating. I need to go in. I need to look at my complete metabolic panel again to see where I'm at and see if my particle number is where I want it, and if it's not, the MCT oil is going to go.
Okay, got it. Yeah. In general, I like MCT oil. I would love to have you come back and talk specifically about intermittent fasting, and give us maybe some examples of how you sort of roll that out with people that are interested in doing it. How do you hold them accountable, and do you give them any structure? And do you have anything you could potentially share with the group in terms of how you do that? I would love to have you back on that. I'm sure everybody would love to hear about that.
Yeah, I mean, I will just say this, that you don't go from 0 to hero overnight with that, right? You don't start, I'm going to do 16-hour fast. You'll probably bonk, right? So you start 12 hours and move up.
Yeah, with nutritional intervention, it's always about what a person can do, not what we want them to do, right?
Yes.
And I always tell my patients, hey, I have a lot of really great ideas. The problem is, if you don't think they're great, they're never going to work for you. So we've got to go on something that you think you can do, and then we've got to try to stick to it. And I'm going to hold you accountable. And of course, we use a lot of testing to actually hold people accountable, because the testing will demonstrate whether or not it's actually fixing the problem that we're trying to fix. Because at the end of the day, that there's no reason to get biomarker testing done unless you're actually willing to do something about the results that you see.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I hold myself accountable that way. It's not like I'm some sort of, discipline ninja. I have to set up accountability structures for myself, and use not only be careful what goes in my mouth, but what comes out of my mouth, the story I'm telling myself, and how I'm structuring my reality so that it supports me instead of tears me down.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so when it comes to your life now, so you're doing intermittent fasting, you're controlling all the leverage points that you've seen in your biomarkers. It sounds like you're doing a lot of good self-care. In other words, your relationships are a big part of your life, and being in tune with those. Is there anything else that you kind of offer people as far as things to do or hope for their future?
Well, aside from what I call like the 5 domains of cognitive health and well-being, which are food, movement, sleep, stress, connectedness, taking food apart a little bit more and nutrients apart a little bit more, there are all kinds of herbs and adaptogens that were key for me and sort of pulling me through a really difficult time. And so, don't ignore the landscape of what I would say is maybe some herbal crutches to get you through. I mean, they were certainly useful for me.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. I want to talk just a second about sleep, because I think it's probably the most ignored thing. And I kept so much obstructive sleep apnea because I have so many people that are overweight. And, once we fix that, so many things start to reverse. Their hormones, of course, get better. Their cholesterol numbers go down. Their blood sugar numbers and A1C go down, as does their fasting insulin. And their cortisol start to have a more normal diurnal pattern where, it's supposed to be high in the morning and low in the evening. And so tell me about sleep as it relates to cognitive decline, because the thing that absolutely fascinates me about sleep is if we don't sleep, we die. And that is incredible to me that, if you look at these people that they stay up, they're trying to hold the truck. They have this contest in Texas where people put their hands on the truck and they try to, the first person or the last person has their hand still on the truck, they get to have the truck. The dealerships do this. But a few years ago, somebody died doing this, a young person, just because they didn't sleep, and they went days without sleeping. And you'll hear about these people playing video games for days and they just keel over, the young people. And we certainly know that without sleep, we die, but also without proper sleep, we go into cognitive decline and neuropsychiatric breakthroughs. So my question for you is, can you talk about sleep, the importance of sleep, and how you manage that for yourself, and how you recommend, management for clients?
Yeah, this is a critical area. And it's close to my heart because it's the one area of those 5 domains that I still struggle with, because I still have I inherited a lot of chronic pain from the biotoxin illness. It really messed some things up. And that pain, during the day, I just deal with it. It's not that big a deal, but it does sometimes fragment my sleep. And, having been a former pain management specialist, it's sort of ironic and karmic that I would now be dealing with some weird chronic pain syndrome status post biotoxin illness. But anyway, it does interfere with sleep. And I can tell you, on the nights when I've been tossing and turning, I'm not very sharp the next day. In fact, I will tell you, I was worried about today, because the previous couple nights I was having a flare up of pain and I was not sleeping well. And I was starting to get forgetful. I was starting to get absent-minded. And I was like, oh my God, I got an interview coming up. And so, last night I slept well, and it makes all the difference. It makes all the difference. Even a single day makes a difference, because there are all kinds of reparative mechanisms that happen at night. If you don't get good, uninterrupted stage 4 restorative sleep, you're not going to be able to engage something called the glymphatic system, which is a system of lymph and waste removal system that has been recently discovered, that engages during certain phases of sleep and actually helps you remove beta amyloid plaque from the brain. Now, beta amyloid plaque is like one of those hallmark signs of Alzheimer's. Is also a positive feedback prionic. It gets into positive feedback prionic loops with itself and starts taking over your brain. So it's got to be removed. So we have natural mechanisms to do that, but they occur during sleep, people. Sleep. So if you're not getting restorative sleep every night, even if you're in bed for 8 hours, but that sleep is not restorative. Let's say you have periodic limb movement disorder or obstructive sleep apnea or some undiagnosed reason why you're not sleeping, or pain, as in my case, then that's got to be dealt with. That's not something to just look sideways at and think, oh, well. And of course, there are all the behavioral reasons why we don't sleep. Is poor, we call it poor sleep hygiene, all the blue screens that we allow to pelt our eyes, until late evening, which retards the release of melatonin. So we wonder why we can't fall asleep. There's, the gaming culture. There's basically, American culture in particular seems to celebrate the I'll sleep when I die kind of mentality. And that's unfortunate because it's not a badge of honor. It really isn't.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. No, it's sold as a badge of honor, going without sleep. And as an ER doctor, I can tell you, I've been chronically sleep deprived. The biggest mistakes we make are always the ones at 3 or 4 in the morning. That's when the radiologists read the wrong, CAT scan, or they give you the wrong CAT scan result, or you make a mental error. Maybe you make a decision and send somebody home you shouldn't have, or you misdiagnose someone. It's always those, those hours. And of course, a lot of accidents will occur in the middle of the night due to people falling asleep, being tired and stuff. It's a badge of honor society. But as a health coach, since we're talking to a lot of health coaches out there, this is like a great area for you guys to focus in on and really make a difference for people. Talking about sleep hygiene and wearing blue blockers and getting away from their phones and their computers, and, an hour or two before bedtime, getting a good sleep, product that's natural maybe that they could try to take. And staying away from all these sleep aids that tend to cause disruption of sleep architecture. So I want to bring a sleep specialist on here, Dr. Kirk Parsley, to talk about sleep. He does this kind of sleep, but I can just tell you sleep is probably the most common thing that's ignored. And when it comes to cognitive decline, it absolutely is critical in my mind. And I do struggle with it too, because when I don't get enough sleep, I'm pretty much mentally worthless. I notice a huge difference, and plus I feel extreme fatigue and I'm tired. And so sleep is a very interesting subject. But when it comes to cognitive decline, it's an area where I think health coaches can actually make a huge difference.
Yeah, that's critical.
So I want to bring you back and talk about intermittent fasting. I hope you'll join us again and talk about that. You've got so much great information on your website. bioflourish.com if anybody wants to go visit it. We'll put it down below, the link below, so you can go and visit. Mark loves to write, and he's a tremendous writer. He writes about all sorts of stuff, a lot of nutritional stuff, a lot of things to look at. I think he's a huge resource for health coaches out there that just want to have really good information to provide their clients. And so I would certainly lift him up as a resource for you guys. And he's a tremendous person. And I really appreciate you, coming on and telling your personal story. Is there anything else you would like to add before we leave?
No, I think we covered it. Amazing.
Okay, great. Well, hopefully we will see you back soon. We'll try to work that in our schedules and get you back on. And I really want to, have people visit your website and read what you write. It's so good. And when they read it, they'll understand.
And, if you don't like long-winded stuff, you can go to Instagram. I'm limited to 2,200 characters there. And so it's always a kind of a fun, creative challenge for me to try to communicate a complete thought with some style and substance in a very short space. So,
great. So on Instagram, how do they find you on that?
It's at BioFlourish, BIOFLOURISH, BIOFLOURISH.
All right, fantastic. Well, everybody, thanks for joining us today. Mark, again, thanks for being on here, and we'll bring you back.
Sounds good. Thank you.